Hello, gorgeous. This is got to be in your face, all mixed up, mash mask, calms, moisturizes, and softens. It has oatmeal, banana, and almond oil. And it's supposed to calm, nourish, and soften. I wish something would calm me down. Not my face, but just me, generally speaking. Anyway, that has to sit for 10 minutes. I think it can probably sit a little more if I get long-winded. So hi, how are you? Hope everybody's doing well. With all the recent deaths in the family, I've kind of had a hard time coming up with something beautiful to talk about. But the most beautiful thing I can think of is home. And by that I mean the home I grew up in with my adoptive parents. The bad thing is I have two scanners in this house, neither of which I can get working. One is connected to a printer belonging to Richard, and the printer is here, but it looks like we left the software at his house. And the other one is a scanner I bought for scanning slides, but it will also scan photos. And likewise, it looks like I've left the software at Richard's house. So as much as I would like to scan pictures from you, I think I can't do that. I have one, I believe, scanned of the actual house I grew up in, which I will insert after these words. Pause, pause. But the rest, I'm going to be holding up photos for you to see, and I just really hope that works. The house was built in 1919. It was in Houston, Texas. The address was 505 Bayland, and that was in the Woodland Heights edition, which was by car about 5 minutes northwest of downtown. So one of the earlier subdivisions, I guess you'd say. It was built by a gentleman named Edward Alkemeyer, who had a dry goods department store in downtown Houston. And my understanding is that Mr. Alkemeyer was hit by the Depression and hung himself from the chandelier in the living room. I don't know that if that's true or not, but it was a pretty interesting thing for a kid to know and might account for my dark side, because I was always trying to solve the mystery of Edward Alkemeyer. So after that, the house passed to someone else. And after that, my father bought it. And I don't know if it was my father or the person in between who turned this house into 6 apartments. But at any rate, that did happen. Mom and Daddy and I lived in apartment 1. And if that I was able to load that photo, if you look at the house, if you look at the front door, to the left of that front door, running from the front of the house to the back, on the ground floor would be apartment 1. Just above that would be apartment 4. And then if you look to the right of the front door, running from the front door to the right side of the house was apartment 3, and then behind that was apartment 2. Above apartment 3 was 6, and above apartment 2 was 5. Oh boy, isn't that exciting news. Okay, so Mama and Daddy and I lived in apartment 1. I'm going to show you next a picture of Joe. I forget to mention, Joe lived in the garage apartment. There was a garage apartment. And Daddy worked full-time as a police officer for the city of Houston. And so Joe was kind of on hand to keep an eye on everybody and everything and to do small repairs. I believe he was retired because at some point when I think I was about 6 or 7 years old, he completely retired and went to live a couple blocks away with his daughter, at which point we'd visit him at his daughter's house. But anyway, I'm going to show you a picture here of me in the great outdoors with Joe. And this photo will show you a little bit of the house. There with me is my grandmother, and then going around in a circle from her is Joe and his daughter right behind me. Then over here on the other side, I think is Joe's brother and perhaps a sister. I can't remember for sure. But that also gives you a good view of apartment 1 that I lived in. And this gives a good view of the house too, but this is me playing with Joe's grandkids. In apartment 2 lived Miss Moody, who I called Miss Moo. Miss Moody taught elementary school, not at my school, but at another school reasonably close by. And the very cool thing is that every summer, the week before school starts, when teachers have their in-services, Miss Moo would take me to school with her 1 or 2 days to help her get her classroom organized and straightened for the upcoming school year. That was always a really fun thing to do that I looked forward to every year. And she had an interesting idiosyncrasy. She loved her floors in her apartment to be highly, highly varnished and shining. So she lived like a Japanese person. When you walked into her apartment, you had to leave your shoes at the front door and come in either barefoot or sockless. And then the other thing interesting I remember about Miss Moo, she didn't tell me this, my mother told me this, is that she had once either had a fling with or had a huge crush with some wrestler. And my understanding, I guess it didn't work out, but after that, she was always very much addicted to watching wrestling on TV. I'm going to adjust the camera. Sorry, this is a weird thing to do mid-screen there. That's a little better, isn't it? I'm a little more centered here. Okay, when we sold the house, which, if memory serves, was 1968, Miss Moo then moved to an apartment in the Heights. I think she retired, and she wanted to live closer to her brother. I don't know the entire life story of everybody, but I know some of it, and these people were my family growing up. In apartment 3 lived Hildegard Barnett, who I called Guard. And this is a picture of her in her apartment, apartment 3, which had beautiful French doors. This was her living room was the living room of the house when it was a house. So it was her chandelier that he allegedly hung himself from. But anyway, this here is Guard. And over here is her sister Eileen, who I could not say Eileen, so I said Eileen. And then that's me. And Eileen only had half of a right arm, like some kind of birth defect. So you will never see her right arm in a photo. Now, this is one of those things, the questions you should have asked your mother, but never cleared it up with her. But to the best of my understanding, I know she worked for the Houston post office downtown. And I think what happened is that her husband, Barney, Mr. Barnett, but I called him Barney. Barney had maybe retired a couple of years earlier than Guard. and he had retired to Brenham, which is about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Houston, northwest of Houston. And so she lived in town during the week, and then on the weekends went home to Barney. That's my understanding, if I remember correctly. But there was certainly a lot of visiting back and forth of Eileen and all of us. So here's a photo of Guard and Barney and me when Mom and Daddy and I went and visited them in Brenham. And just as a special treat, we went probably deliberately when the bluebonnets were blooming. And so there's my mother and Guard and I in a field of bluebonnets with my butt sticking up in the air, picking bluebonnets. Guard's daughter, Sue, was married to a gentleman, and they lived in Pennsylvania. And they had two daughters, Bianca and Carlene, and at least once a year they all came to visit, and we'd all get to play together, we three girls. And I'm very happy to say that recently I found Bianca on Facebook, and I'm going to let her know about this video, and she can maybe clear up any misconceptions that I have. But one of the coolest remembrances I have of Guard is that she made ceramics, and she had a little kiln in her kitchen, in her dining room, where she had that set up, and she got my mother interested in it, and together they made a lot of beautiful ceramics, and she made me one of those old-fashioned dolls that are made of ceramics. Those dolls always have black or blonde hair, but mine was made specifically for me, and it had brown hair, and it's the only one I've ever seen with brown hair. Unfortunately, she got broken some years back. But I do have some other things that Guard and my mother made from those days. And also the other real treat is that every year for Christmas, Guard and Eileen would make these little, they were kind of sugar mint candies, and they were, maybe about the size of a quarter on average. And they would be like flowers or fruit or a cornucopia or little animals. And they hand painted these, I guess with, the kind of food coloring it's okay to use on candy. And it would come in these beautiful layers of tissue paper in these either silver or gold foil boxes, say about 5 by 7, 5 by 5 by 7. And I would make that box of candy last till March, because this stuff was as delicious as it was too pretty to eat. And that was just something you looked forward to every year. One of the joys of my youth. Apartment 4, oddly, it didn't have a long-term resident. In fact, let me pause here to say that my father, being grandfather age, started having heart attacks, and that's why we moved to the suburbs. He couldn't take care of the house anymore. And so his apartments became vacant. He just left them vacant, thinking it'd be easier to show the house. So when Guard moved, nobody else moved into apartment 3. And apartment 4, which directly above us, for some reason didn't have a long-term tenant, as apartment 6, 5, 3, and 2 did. But the tenant I remember most was Judy and her mother, and I don't know Judy's mother's name, but I do remember that Judy had a problem with her eyes. She was not completely, but partially blind, and there was some kind of hope that Judy was going to have a surgery at some point. So anyway, this is a picture of Judy with me. I want to get this very clear. I hope that's focusing okay. There. On one of my birthdays. My best girlfriends lived next door, and they were well, next door to the left and one house back. And they were Georgie and Penny Benitez. This is Georgie, that's me, and that's Penny. And they had a very handsome older brother named Rudy. And Rudy, of course, would not even give me the time of day, as is to be expected of handsome young men. But sad to say that on the day that Georgie graduated from high school, she and Rudy and Penny and another young man were driving to Galveston to celebrate graduation, and they were in a Volkswagen VW, and the wind, there was some kind of wind shear that picked up the Volkswagen and threw it into the guardrail, and everybody but Penny died. And this was, years later, and we had moved, and I was no longer in touch with them, but it was, and still is, devastating. And my understanding is that Penny broke a leg or something, and they also said, and I don't know if this is true, that her hair turned white overnight. I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, these were my best girlfriends, and I still miss them. I'm going to just, before I talk about apartment 5 and 6, I'm just going to give you some shots, kind of a tour around the living room to what extent I can. I loved my house so much, as you can see. There's my first snow. Mama told me that when that photo was taken, I was saying, "My feet are on fire." And there's Gigi the poodle outside in the snow. See, downstairs would be apartment 1, and upstairs would be apartment 4 in that photo. Okay, so anyway, this is the living room facing north. With all manner of stuff. But you can see there's a heater and a TV and a radio and the chair. And then so if you go around this way on that wall over there would be the fireplace. So here's the bookshelf behind the chair and the fireplace, and for some reason at that point they had the sofa in front of the fireplace. These were tiny little apartments. That's Grandma and me. And that's Daddy and me. Same fireplace. And that's Mama and me. So going a little further down the wall, you can see the filing cabinet and the desk. And then here's a picture later where I had a toy chest up against the fireplace. And you can see, again, the filing cabinet and the desk. And then going around the corner, there's the front window and my butt. They love taking photos of my frilly underwear and my butt. Anyway, that is a shot of the living room some years earlier. Here's a shot of the bedroom. That's shooting toward the west. And some years later, in the bedroom, shooting towards the east. In apartment 5 was Helene Carpenter. She was from Nice in France. I'm not quite sure she was divorced, but at any rate, she was in some way estranged from her husband. And she had a son named Pierre who was in the U.S. military. I don't really know exactly what. I just know I have his dog tags. I have many fond memories of Mrs. Carpenter, but I'm afraid I have no photo. I do have some film footage of her, and if I can ever get my video cassette transferred over to the computer, I will I will make another video of my early days and show that. Um, I bought a thing and was able to transfer it to CD, but it won't let you transfer CD to the computer unless you have some other kind of software. So, at any rate, I've gone on a long time. This may be the longest video I've ever done with a mask. This mask is going to rot off my face. Anyway, Mrs. Carpenter, very fond memories. When I was 5, she tried to teach me French. And we were not successful with this endeavor because all I wanted to do was go out and play. And knowing what I do now about linguistics, if my mother had just let Miss Carpenter babysit me an hour a day and speak to me only in French, I'd have grown up bilingual, but nobody knew that stuff back then unless they were a linguist. So that didn't happen. Her apartment always smelled like garlic, which was, I mean, maybe that's why I love garlic so much. And another thing she did that was very cool was every New Year's Eve, the Benitez family would come over and everybody in the apartments would assemble and we'd celebrate New Year's Eve. And she always made a huge batch of tamales. And that was always wonderful. And, you know, the parents would sit in the kitchen. We'd usually go, actually, everybody from our place would go to the Benitez house. And the parents would play cards in the kitchen and have beer or whatever. And we kids would play board games in the living room. And also Daddy would always have sparklers for us. And that was great. When I was 8, I'm afraid Mrs. Carpenter had a heart attack and passed away in the bedroom in my mother's arms. It was a weird thing. I woke up having a nightmare, which is probably one of the 2 times in my life I've been awakened by a nightmare. And within seconds of Mama coming in to comfort me, there was the banging on the door, and Mrs. Carpenter was having a heart attack, and I was sent to the front porch for the duration. Anyway, that was a very sad thing. I may have mentioned to you my car that was supposed to be my car when I grew up. It was a 1957 T-Bird, and I mentioned that because it was part of my youth. Here is my car, except when we moved to the suburbs, the neighbor made Daddy an offer he can refuse, and so I didn't get my car, and I can't even remember what my first car was. It was so nondescript. It wasn't a T-Bird, I can tell you that. Okay, and then finally, the best of all, when I was 5 years old, in apartment 6, Victor Chen had lived in apartment 6. And Victor Chen was Chinese-Canadian from Vancouver originally. And interestingly enough, later as an adult, I ended up renting an apartment from Victor. I thought that was very, very cool. Anyway, when I was 5, the Jones family moved upstairs. Albert, his wife Kim, who was a Japanese American from Hawaii, and their daughter Corinne. And later, Albert Jr. came along, and later Dorothy came along, who was always called Binky. So when I was 5 years old, I finally kind of got brothers and sisters. And it truly, truly made life even more happier than it had already been. Anyway, here's a picture of Corinne, the tallest and oldest, Albert Jr., and Binky standing in front of the front door. Corinne and I have also recently established friendship on Facebook, and she recently posted this photo, and it's kind of cool to me that we both have a copy of this photo. But this is me with Corinne and Binky in apartment 6. That's probably in the living room. Oh no, that's Albert Jr. Not Binky. That's Albert Jr. His second birthday, it says, 1963. I want to make sure this focuses. These cameras are so weird. Okay, here's a picture of Corinne and I in the bedroom, and Corinne has curlers in her hair. And this is all four of us outside on the swing set. And this is, it looks like me, Corinne and Albert Jr. with my grandmother. And I guess it's Easter. Anyway, sadly, Albert Sr., I guess he had been in the Navy when he met Kim in Hawaii. But by the time they moved to live with us, he was in the Merchant Marines. And sadly, he fell through a hole on the ship and broke his neck and passed away. I guess when I was, 8 or 9 years old. And but Kim eventually ended up marrying the next door neighbor, and she just moved across the street, and we were still a big happy family, and just got 2 more kids from George, who had 2 kids. He was a widower, so we got Jim and Leslie too, his kids, as a member of the family. So anyway, that's home, and I miss home a lot. I loved my growing up very much, as you can probably see. I hope I didn't bore you to death. I hope these stories were slightly interesting. I'm going to go wash my face. I'll be right back, and we'll see if the mask was any good. Hello, gorgeous. I'm back. I have just washed my face. That's why my cheeks are nice and rosy, but oh my goodness. Since I left it on twice as long as I was supposed to, 2.5 or 3 times longer than I was supposed to, I am definitely calm, nourished, and softened. I don't know. I'm certainly very soft. Calm, I don't know what that means, but anyway, very soft. And I guess time will tell whether I'm nourished or not. Anyway, this is the longest video I've ever made. This will take half a day to upload. So I better get busy. See y'all next time. Love you. Oh, and go see Cheryl. Cheryl did a mask video about mermaids this week. I'll list it below. Bye.